After my uncle sold my grandma's bakery to Starbucks while I was still grieving, I found her old rolling pin in the trash, turned her recipes into a booming online biz, and got so big his own lawyer begged me to settle first. I still remember the smell of cinnamon and burnt sugar hanging in the air when I walked past the old storefront for the first time after Grandma's funeral. Her name, Marjorie's Bakes and Blessings, was gone, ripped off the glass, replaced by the shiny green mermaid logo. The whole front was remodeled in those soulless corporate colors. Inside, people were sipping frappuccinos where Grandma once sold snickerdoodles for 50 cents and remembered every customer by name. I stood there with the urns still in my car. The shock felt physical, like someone had punched me. I called my Uncle Ray immediately. He was the executor of Grandma's estate, and we had agreed to keep the bakery open at least until we figured out what to do next. That was her wish. She wanted it passed down, not sold off like junk. He didn't even sound sorry. Look, kid, it's just business. Starbucks offered more than we could ever make in a decade. You're young, start your own thing. That was it. No hesitation. No warmth. Just that cold, smug tone. I could practically hear him grinning through the phone. I didn't even have time to process before I saw a dumpster parked behind the shop, filled with everything that used to make that bakery home. Mixing bowls, recipe books, the old stool Grandma used to sit on when her legs got tired. And buried under a pile of broken shelves was her rolling pin. The same one I'd used since I was little, when she taught me how to roll dough thin enough to see light through it. It had her initials carved in the handle, MB. I pulled it out, covered in dust, and just stood there shaking. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the rolling pin. I didn't know what I was going to do, only that I couldn't let that be the end of her story. Then I found her handwritten recipe cards in an old box of my stuff. Some were stained with frosting. Some had little doodles on the edges. The smell of vanilla and butter almost came back when I unfolded them. Something broke open inside me, and something else started to form. I didn't know it yet, but that night was the start of the biggest storm my uncle would ever walk into. Because if he thought Starbucks was competition, he hadn't met me yet. Grandma Marjorie built that bakery from nothing. She started it in 1989, in the corner of a crumbling strip mall in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, after Grandpa died and left her with 3 kids and a mountain of debt. It became her second home, and ours too. I grew up behind that counter. She'd hand me cookie dough when I was 5, let me decorate cupcakes when I was 8, and by the time I was 16, I was helping open at 5 a.m. every Saturday. It wasn't just a bakery. It was our family heartbeat. But not everyone saw it that way. Uncle Ray, her middle child, was always the business guy. He left Lancaster for Philadelphia to work in commercial real estate, and every time he came back, he'd make these little comments like, "Mom, you could sell this place for a fortune. Why waste time baking when you could cash out?" Grandma would just smile and say, "Sweetheart, not everything's for sale." When she got sick, pancreatic cancer, fast and cruel, Ray swooped back in, playing the perfect son. I was there every day helping her eat, cleaning, driving her to appointments. He showed up maybe once a week, always in some expensive suit, always talking numbers. Still, Grandma trusted him. He was the executor of her will, and she believed he'd protect what she built. When she passed, she left me the recipes and him the building. Her words in the letter were, "You'll keep it together, the two of you. Family and flour, that's all we need." Except Ray didn't even wait for the burial to start calling developers. The property sat in a prime location near the new highway, and he couldn't resist. He said he'd find a buyer that would honor her legacy. A month later, it was Starbucks. The kicker, he sold it for triple what the place was worth. Didn't tell me a word until it was done. Everyone in town knew before I did. People whispered about it at the grocery store. I was humiliated, angry, powerless. But grief has a strange way of sharpening you. The week after the sale, I quit my job at a food distributor, dug up Grandma's old flour-dusted recipes, and started baking again in my tiny apartment kitchen. At first, I just sold cookies to friends online. I called it Marjorie's Legacy because I didn't know what else to name it. But the orders started trickling in, then doubling, then flooding. I worked until 3 a.m. most nights, mixing batter and packing boxes on my living room floor. I kept Grandma's rolling pin on the counter, like a promise. What I didn't realize yet was that my little tribute was about to grow fast, fast enough to draw attention. And soon, someone was going to try to take that away too. Within 6 months, Marjorie's legacy exploded. I didn't have a storefront, just an online shop and a rented kitchen space, but orders were coming from everywhere. TikTok and Instagram had blown it up after one video of me rolling dough with grandma's old pin went viral. I wasn't even trying to be an influencer. I was just talking about grief, family, and the smell of brown sugar. But people connected with it. They said the cookies tasted like home. By Christmas, I had to hire 2 part-time bakers and my cousin Jess to handle shipping. We went from $500 a week to $10,000, then $30,000. I couldn't believe it. The local paper ran a story about the granddaughter bringing back Lancaster's favorite bakery from her apartment. The photo was me, covered in flour, holding Grandma's rolling pin. I framed it. Then came the moment that shifted everything. Starbucks, the same Starbucks that bought my grandma's shop, reached out. They wanted to partner, said they admired my authentic brand story. The email made my hands shake. I didn't respond. Instead, I posted a screenshot of the message with the caption, "Some stories don't belong on a corporate menu." That post got over 400,000 likes. Orders tripled again. And that's when Uncle Ray called. "Hey kid," he said, acting all warm suddenly. "I've been following your success. Really proud of you. Maybe we could, work together, expand. Investors are asking about you." I wanted to hang up, but I didn't. I wanted to hear what his game was. He went on about how he had the business experience and how we could make Marjorie's legacy a national chain, like Crumble but classy. He said he could get us real money. I told him no. Firmly, that's when his voice changed, got cold again. "You're using recipes that belong to the estate. You might want to be careful." I laughed in disbelief. "She gave me the recipes." "In writing," he said. "We'll see what the paperwork says." 2 weeks later, I got served a cease and desist letter from his lawyer, claiming I was profiting from intellectual property that belonged to the estate and that Marjorie's legacy was trademark infringement because the name included Grandma's. It felt like being kicked in the stomach. All I'd wanted was to keep her memory alive, and now my own family was threatening to destroy it. But I wasn't going to fold. If Ray wanted a war, he'd picked the wrong granddaughter to mess with. Because I was done baking cookies just to remember her. Now, I was baking for revenge. When I got that cease and desist letter, I thought it was just Ray being spiteful. I figured he was bluffing, trying to scare me. But a few days later, I found out the truth, and it made my stomach drop. He wasn't just threatening me. He was stealing from me again. A friend of mine who worked at a marketing agency in Philly texted me one morning. "Hey, weird thing, your uncle just pitched a bakery brand that looks exactly like yours." She sent me the deck. Right there on the first slide. Marjorie's Bake Co., same font style, same script, even a photo of my grandma he'd taken from my Instagram. His plan was to license her story to a chain of boutique coffee shops in the tri-state area, using my grandma's face as branding. And he had investors already, real money behind it. The rage that hit me felt like fire. He'd already sold her bakery to Starbucks behind my back, and now he was trying to sell her legacy, my tribute, to someone else. I couldn't stop shaking. I drove to his office in Philly that same day. Didn't call, didn't text, just showed up. The receptionist tried to stop me, but I stormed past her anyway. He was sitting there, smug as ever, behind a glass desk with a view of the city. "Why are you using her face?" I said. He barely looked up. "Because she was my mother," he said coolly. "You don't own her memory. You don't get to profit from it." He leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Funny, that's exactly what you're doing." I couldn't believe how calm he was, how detached. Then he said something that chilled me. "You could have had a piece of this, You just had to play ball, but you had to go and make it personal." That was when I realized he hadn't filed that lawsuit to stop me. He'd filed it to weaken me, to drain my savings with legal fees while he ran off with the brand I built. I left his office shaking but clear-headed. I didn't cry this time. When I got home, I called my friend Jess and said, "We're going to fight back." But not in court, not yet. The next few weeks, I gathered everything: emails, photos, timestamps, copies of Grandma's will. I also found something I'd almost forgotten about. A video Grandma recorded a few months before she died, thanking customers and talking about how she wanted the bakery to stay in the family through my granddaughter. That video was gold. Proof of intent. But that wasn't what gave me the real idea for revenge. The real idea came when I found out where Ray had gotten the money to fund his fake company. And that discovery, that changed everything. The money trail was what broke the whole thing open. I was combing through the trademark filings for Marjorie's Bake Co. when I noticed something weird. One of the listed investors was Lancaster Heritage Development Group, a small local fund that specialized in flipping historic properties. The same group that had partnered with Ray on the Starbucks sale. That's when it hit me. He hadn't just sold Grandma's bakery. He'd sold it to himself, or at least to a company he secretly owned through Shell. Starbucks wasn't even the buyer. He'd flipped the property to them after the fact, pocketing a ridiculous profit, all while pretending to honor her legacy. I didn't even know whether to scream or vomit. But instead, I did what Grandma would have done. I got quiet, calculated. I started documenting everything. Pulled public records, tax filings, even the county deed history. Sure enough, the name Marion Holdings LLC popped up as the initial purchaser before Starbucks. Guess whose signature was on the incorporation papers? Raymond E. Brooks. That meant he'd defrauded the estate. And if I could prove that, he wasn't just a manipulative jerk, he was a criminal. I called my old college roommate, Mia, who worked in corporate law in Pittsburgh. She didn't specialize in real estate, but she had connections. When I sent her everything, she said, "Jesus, this isn't just unethical, it's fraudulent conveyance. He could lose everything." So we built a plan. First, I rebranded Marjorie's Legacy slightly, changed the name to Marjorie's True Legacy. New logo, same recipes. It made the C-Sandes claim meaningless. The public didn't even notice. Next, I uploaded that video of Grandma, the one where she said she wanted me to carry on the bakery. I didn't mention Ray by name, but I talked about someone who tried to erase her memory for money. The internet did the rest. Comments poured in. People found old Yelp reviews, town records, photos of the Starbucks takeover. It went viral all over again, but this time with a purpose. Within a week, hashtags like Justice for Marjorie and #Legacy Not for Sale started trending. News outlets picked it up. Orders skyrocketed even higher. Meanwhile, Mia quietly sent an anonymous packet to the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office, with all the proof of Ray's shady property deal. And just when I thought things couldn't get more intense, Ray's lawyer called me. He wanted to talk privately. I thought it was a trap, but then he said something I didn't expect. "Listen, between you and me, he's made some serious mistakes. If you're smart, you'll let me help you before this explodes." That's when I realized someone inside his camp wanted out. But why? That was the question that led straight to the next twist. And what I found next would make even Ray's betrayal look small. The lawyer's name was Daniel Heller, and when he asked to meet, I agreed, mostly out of curiosity. We met in a quiet coffee shop in downtown Lancaster, the irony not lost on either of us. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't waste time with small talk. "You're going to want to record this," he said quietly. "Off the record, I can't keep working for your uncle." I didn't even blink. "Why?" He looked around the cafe, then leaned in. "Because he's not just screwing you. He's screwing everyone. He's been laundering money through that development group, using fake investors, fake loans, the works." My heart started pounding. He pulled out a folder, actual printed documents. "These are emails and wire records. He used your grandmother's estate as collateral for a loan that never existed. Then he forged your signature on one of the settlement documents to make it look like you agreed." I froze. "He forged my name," Daniel nodded. "He thinks you won't find out because technically the estate's been dissolved. But if this gets investigated, he's done. Completely." It felt surreal, like a nightmare layered over another. Then Daniel dropped the real bomb. "He's planning to declare bankruptcy under one of his shell companies next quarter, so he can write off all his debt before the AG catches up. But before he does, he's trying to sell your grandmother's recipes to a corporate buyer overseas. The contract's already drafted." I sat there, numb. This wasn't about family. It wasn't even about the bakery anymore. It was about him squeezing every last cent from Grandma's name before everything came crashing down. I asked Daniel why he was telling me this. He sighed. "Because he offered to make me partner in exchange for keeping quiet. And I couldn't do it. I grew up here. My mom used to buy cakes from your grandma. She deserved better than this." For the first time in months, I felt something like gratitude, but it was mixed with something darker. Daniel handed me a flash drive. Everything's on here. Emails, bank trails, shell corporations. If you're smart, you won't go straight to the police yet, you'll use it. Use it how? I asked. He gave me a tired smile. Make him choke on his own brand. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by flour bags, mixing bowls, and my laptop open to those files. Every transfer, every document, it was all there. Solid proof of fraud, forgery, and theft. And one thing became crystal clear. I wasn't just going to expose Ray. I was going to ruin him. But before I could strike, I needed to understand why. Why he would destroy his own mother's legacy so thoroughly. And the reason I uncovered next was so cruel, so cold, that even I couldn't believe it at first. I expected anger. I expected greed. I did not expect the tone of the emails I found buried in that flash drive. Calm, clinical, almost bored. Like someone writing an inventory list and ticking off victims. Daniel had given me access to 3 months of Ray's communications with his inner circle. At first, I skimmed for proof: wire transfers, shell company memos, forged documents. What stopped me cold was a single phrase that kept repeating in subject lines and spreadsheets: liquidate intangible heritage. It wasn't a slip of passion. It was a strategy. In one email from Ray to a consultant in Jersey, he wrote, plain as a grocery list: family story is a liability. Remove narrative. Treat recipes as IP. Package as product. Sell before AG freeze. No exceptions. There's a line you don't expect from your uncle about your grandmother's hands and her sugar-stained apron. He didn't say sorry. He said, remove narrative. Not destroy the bakery, remove the human story so the thing becomes a widget. It hit me like a physical slap. He didn't hate the bakery because he wanted money. He hated the bakery because it demanded respect, memory, lineage. He wanted the profit without the weight of people remembering who had made it. The spreadsheet was worse. Columns titled asset, buyer, timeline, and chillingly, final silence cost. There were numbers next to final silence cost. Real money earmarked for people to look the other way. There was a contract to sell grandma's recipes to a multinational that specialized in buying authentic regional brands and homogenizing them. One clause: seller to provide originals. Originals will be retired post-transfer. In other words, erase the source, keep the product. Then the email that explained motive, blunt and unflinching, from Ray to an investor. I need a clean exit. Prestige is rent I can't pay with my current portfolio. This will buy us into the club. Banks, boards, country clubs. Legacy is a currency. I'm exchanging blood for social capital. Not a plea, not a defense, an equation. He literally viewed his mother's life and my grief as convertible assets to buy status. He planned to turn her recipes into a brand footprint, sell the brand for a payout, launder it through shell entities, and use the cash to buy himself into the elite circles he'd always been jealous of growing up in Lancaster. The guy who used to make jokes about selling for a fortune had mapped out how to sell his mother to the highest bidder. Most chilling of all was an email thread between him and the woman who'd been listed as a consultant on the acquisition. She wrote about contingencies, how to minimize sentimental fallout, and recommended a PR narrative that framed the sell-off as legacy preservation through commercialization. Ray responded, good. No one needs to know about the annexations or the forgeries. We'll tidy up any loose family ties. This is business. Tidy up any loose family ties. Not repair, not address, but tidy up. Like a yard sale after a death. It wasn't about money for bills or a desperate gamble. It was pure climbing. He wanted to buy status, influence, and a future where his name wasn't the middle child joke, where he sat at the right tables. To do that, he was willing to dissolve my grandmother's life into a line item, to criminally manipulate her estate, to forge my name, and to pay others to keep quiet. No remorse. No shame. Only calculation. Reading that made something inside me go very cold. This wasn't just theft or spite. It was erasure, an attempt to make her unperson, to make the bakery a product that could be moved without anyone remembering the woman who made it human. Knowing this didn't make me softer. It made me sharper. I had everything I needed to blow the whole thing open, but I also saw how deep his safety nets ran. He had plans for escape, for bankruptcy shields, buyers lined up. I could expose him and watch him crumble, or I could make sure he never got clean money from what he stole. Either way, he wouldn't get the last laugh. I didn't want revenge when I started. I wanted Grandma's recipes to live. But by the time I sat in the conference room with Ray's lawyer, my face was numb from crying too much and smiling too little. The man across from me, Daniel's last-minute warning, had already turned him into something different in my eyes. Not a lawyer, but the first to raise the white flag. He asked to settle. He begged, actually. He said it quietly, like he was ashamed. "You need to stop," he said. "This can get very messy for everyone. If you want money, we can talk settlement. Avoid the AG. Avoid bankruptcy court. Avoid headlines." I looked at him and thought of the spreadsheet labeled Final Silence Cost. I thought of the rolling pin still hanging over my stove, of Grandma's laugh when someone burned the bottom of a pie. I thought of him filing the deed to Marion Holdings with his own signature while calling it a strategic transaction. So I did something I never thought I would. I smiled. Not because I was softening. Because I had a plan that would squeeze him without handing him anything. First, Mia and Daniel had already fed the Attorney General an anonymous package. That put a legal sword over his head. Daniel had also slipped me the investor deck and wire records. I hired a small boutique lawyer recommended by Mia. No flashy firm, just a hungry woman who loved paperwork and hated assholes. We filed a quiet civil suit for fraudulent conveyance and demanded an accounting. The filing put a cloud on the property title. Banks hate clouds. Second, I used the one weapon Ray didn't expect: people. I released Grandma's unlisted video and a redacted version of the documents to the local paper and a reporter in Philly who'd smelled corruption before. We didn't scream fraud in every headline. We let the documents and questions do that. People in Lancaster started showing up at town meetings asking why a man who'd sold a beloved bakery for a suspiciously large profit was on the same development deals as municipal leaders. The pressure mounted, small, steady like yeast. Third, the online community, my customers, didn't let go. #Justice for Marjorie became more than a hashtag. It became people calling investors, asking for accountability. Investors started to back away quietly. The funding pipeline for Marjorie's Bake Co., the fake company he'd been pitching, dried up. When Ray finally realized the banks and the AG weren't going to let him quietly shuffle assets into a bankruptcy hole, he panicked. He called me at midnight, slurred, pleading. I didn't pick up. Instead, I let his lawyer call again and recorded the conversation, legally, in Pennsylvania, one-party consent. In it, Ray admitted the shell purchases to cover personal debts. That recording became the hinge in our next move. His lawyer begged me in person to accept a settlement, pay him a fraction, sign a non-disparagement clause, and the suit would disappear. He offered numbers that would have bought a small house. I countered, public restoration, not hush money. I wanted the deed untangled, and a public statement acknowledging the fraudulent conveyance, plus a significant restitution fund to be used to open a real, community-led bakery in Lancaster with a board that included me and 2 local small business owners. Faced with the AG looming, banks freezing his assets, investors gone, and people calling for him to be held accountable, he took the settlement. He signed the deed reversion, paid restitution, and agreed to withdraw his trademark filings. The money he gave wasn't enough to mend the years he'd erased, but it was a start. The municipality granted us a small, low-interest loan to get the new bakery built in a different space. Still Lancaster, still Marjorie's recipes, still my rolling pin on the counter. At opening, the line wrapped around the block. I watched faces in the crowd, old regulars, kids with frosting on their cheeks, a few journalists who'd stuck around. I felt the old rhythm snap into place. Flour, steam, laughter. Ray moved away. He kept his name in a few court records and a lot of gossip. He didn't get arrested. There wasn't a full criminal conviction before the settlement, but he lost the thing he wanted most. The quiet slide into respectability. The club he'd bought into closed its door. I still have bad days. I still wake up at 3 a.m. thinking about what was taken. But when I press that rolling pin down on dough and it thins in the way Grandma taught me, I know something else. Not every loss is final. Some are a beginning. And if Ray ever needs a recipe for humble pie, I have one he can't trademark.